In 1934, Arnold J. Toynbee shook the world of anthropology when he published A Study of History. It was a massive work that wouldn't be finished until 1961, but the conclusion he reached was powerfully concise. Toynbee concluded that, in short, civilizations rose and fell at the hand of innovation. Societies that innovated thrived, and those that didn't collapsed into the sands of time. Some people have always been quick to cry innovation or death, and there is some truth in that statement. But this one-sided view of civilization was, well, one-sided. The story of human history isn't merely a catalog of survival. It's also an epic tale of fulfillment and the search for what makes us human. More simply put, living is more than not dying. This idea has fueled a more recent movement, advocating a return to agrarianism and to a simpler time, de-innovation. These two forces, apparently at odds, represent the extremes of the debate about the merits of civilization. The question is simply put, but near impossible to answer: survival or fulfillment? Why do we innovate? At first glance, the answer is obvious: because it helps us survive. Innovation can help us to prepare for the future, to protect ourselves from nature, and from each other. Being able to stay one technological step ahead of your enemies was often the difference between victory and defeat. The longbow, the cannon, and the steerable rudder were just a few of the innovations that changed the direction of history in favor of those who developed them. This advantage is so pronounced that some historians, like the aforementioned Toynbee, categorize civilizations into stages of decay, depending on how adeptly they innovated. This perspective creates a survival of the fittest dynamic, where cultures that don't or can't innovate die off. The result is a world full of innovative cultures that compete to gain an edge over each other and improve their standard of living. So what's the problem? Innovation always comes at a cost. Innovation is defined as the practical implementation of ideas that result in the introduction of new goods or services, or improvement in offering goods or services. This means that innovation creates change by nature, and in small doses that change brings a net good. An example of this is the iron plow. In the early Middle Ages, most farming plows were made of wood. They often broke and wore out, and agricultural production was relatively low because of it. Around the 5th century AD, however, the heavy iron plow, or karuka, was introduced to Europe, raising output and lowering the time required for farming. Now, the flip side of every innovation, of course, is instability. Wealthier farmers no doubt obtained iron plows first, and those who produced wooden plows suffered losses. This was unfortunate, but justified, because that instability was followed by centuries of higher production and a better standard of living. In other words, the long-term prosperity justified the short-term loss. You probably noticed I worded the premise to only include change in small doses, and this is where the problem arises. The issue with societies is that they're rarely self-regulating, especially when it comes to innovation. We've already established that healthy societies relentlessly push to innovate, and for most of human history, this wasn't a problem, because technology is like a tree, with innovation only happening at the tips of the branches. In practice, this means that innovation requires a sizable understanding of the current technology before improvements could be made. And in the ancient world, lack of education among the common people made that a rare occurrence. More simply put, for most of human history, ignorance served as a safety valve that contained innovation. But in today's world, for better or worse, widespread education has removed that safety valve. Nothing is stopping innovation from occurring exponentially. So now, we have to tackle the looming question: what happens when change doesn't come in small doses? To properly understand the question, we have to first understand that technology and culture are tied together like players in a three-legged race. Whenever one outpaces the other, tremendous social disillusionment can develop. For most of human history, the aforementioned relative crawl of technological development had ensured that culture didn't change too rapidly. But beginning in the 19th century, this broke down. Technological innovation exploded, triggering, unsurprisingly, the greatest cultural shift in human history. Change will always create a period of instability, as with the iron plow. But constant change makes this instability constant. Something that was once a transitory period can become a source of disillusionment. If taken to its absolute extreme, we eventually become like Sisyphus, constantly pushing the innovation boulder for the sake of pushing it, at the cost of everything else. A perfect example of this is social media. Social media was envisioned as one of the greatest communication tools ever made. It was advertised as a system that could reunite old friends, help us make new ones, and bring the whole world closer together. The culmination of a utopian dream. The result was far from utopian. What consumers received was a system designed to addict, a system synonymous with teen depression and anxiety, a system full of rampant, hard-to-trace bullying, a system we couldn't hope to monitor, which we then handed our kids. We used it until we couldn't remember a world where we didn't, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. Innovation was supposed to be the shining light that would guide us to utopia and fulfillment. So what happened? Where did we go wrong? What did we overlook? We overlooked ourselves. We were so bent on using technology to create a utopia that we didn't stop to think about if technology could even create a utopia. The culture shock that was social media engulfed our society faster than we could adapt, and our own technology left us out to dry. The core reason for this is psychological. Humans weren't created to live in a world of constant change. They're creatures of habit, and if you change the world around them too quickly, they'll break. This societal fracturing was the zeitgeist that gave birth to postmodernism in the early 20th century. People were driven to reject the concept of truth because the cold reality of constant change was so grim that we couldn't handle it. People dissociated out of necessity. Because innovation has the potential to cause so much damage, some people have argued that we should avoid this problem altogether and live in communal agrarian societies. The crux of the argument is that humanity, stripped of fulfillment, means nothing. The problem with that is that there's an equally staggering cost on the opposite side of the fence. So, can we just forget about innovation? Rewind the clock a few thousand years and live fulfilled in an agrarian society? No, we cannot. It would fail for many reasons. Firstly, because no one would go along with it. People have become too attached to the comforts of modern life. Nothing will ever convince any sizable portion of the population to give up modern life voluntarily. The only way to accomplish this logistically would be to force the world backward through nuclear war, biological warfare, or some other essentially planet-resetting mechanism. It goes without saying that the suffering caused by such an event would undermine the stated goal of increasing fulfillment. Not to mention, survivors would retain knowledge of civilization and attempt to rebuild as quickly as possible, making the genocide a likely meaningless one anyway. The even bigger problem, though, is that even if everybody agreed, it would still not be a wise course of action. Innovation is hardwired into our brains for a reason. If we stopped innovating, we would doom our species to eventual death by a disaster of some type. The purpose of innovation is to give our species a buffer against extinction. This is why space travel and space colonization are so important. Our race is one asteroid away from extinction. Becoming a multi-planet civilization is just one example of how innovation can increase our chances of survival. Innovation also helps us live better, healthier, longer lives. Everything from democracy to medicine was an innovation, and these innovations together have shaped every aspect of modern life. Ultimately, though, one factor drives me towards continuing to innovate: hope. If we revert back to an agrarian society, we already know what that looks like. Potentially more fulfilled, but plagued by sickness, death, pain, ignorance, and filth. But if we continue on the current path, we don't know where it'll take us. What if we soon discover something that allows us to fix the problem with no strings attached? That underlying hope of a better future is both the building block and most valuable asset of innovation. If we take the agrarian option, we forfeit all hope. We accept defeat and give up. But trudging forward, however painful, at least brings with it the chance of discovering a solution. So the question is, how do we balance innovation with fulfillment in the meantime as we search for that solution? This is where we tackle the middle ground of living in balance. There are several options society could take to mitigate the damage of constant change without sacrificing innovation. The optimal solution probably includes some combination of these ideas. The world our brains were built to live in through culture and the world we've built for ourselves through technology are very different worlds. Our psychology and our technology are rapidly diverging in a game of reckless chicken, and unless they're brought back together, our culture and technology will break. Logically, there's only two ways to fix this problem: change technology to fit us, or change ourselves to fit technology. The first option is to change ourselves and our behaviors to suit this new world we've created. The biggest source of disillusionment is a lack of meaning and purpose. Religion may potentially solve this problem. I must confess a bias here, because I'm a Christian and therefore do have a predisposition to turn to my faith for answers. But that being said, whether you identify as religious or not, it cannot be denied that religion has served as a culturally stabilizing force for millennia. It's been shown that people who are religious are more likely to have a sense of meaning and less likely to struggle with existentialism and anomie. Bringing back societal emphasis on faith in a higher power could soften the existentialism problem. Another option is to change ourselves. The human brain was designed to live in a slow-paced, natural world. As we've transformed our environment, we've been long overdue to transform ourselves. Now, this transformation can take many forms. One of the more passive approaches could be better social education from a young age, changing culture to lift the taboos on mental illness and therapy, changing the way we raise our kids to encourage them to be open about their feelings, a big systemic problem for boys, as well as creating a more inclusive society in general. As urbanization continues, the need for these skills will only increase. Another, much more radical option is to literally change ourselves to fit the world we've made, using biotechnology and genetic engineering to create brains that can compute and process faster in a world that's constantly speeding up, designing brains that are immune to fallacies and subliminal messaging to protect us against ever more vicious advertising, even designing a system that allows us to be psychologically healthy without human connection. In short, designing people more compatible with change. Now, I would like to note that I'm fully aware of the potentially dystopian consequences of this route. This approach is both not possible with current technology and also not recommended unless as a last resort. I wanted to include it on the list because however grim it may be, in all likelihood it could work as a Hail Mary solution. The second approach is to change technology to suit us without sacrificing innovation. A big issue that facilitates disillusionment is lack of human connection. One way we could fix this is with redesigned urban planning. Current urban planning was actually designed for transportation instead of people, and this has severely damaged our social environment. Redesigning urban areas to correct this could vastly lessen the problem. While the story of how urban planning got derailed and how we can fix it is an interesting one, this essay is already too long and that could easily be an essay in itself. If you're curious about the topic, there's an insightful video by Adam Something that talks about it in much more detail, link in the description. While this is by no means an exhaustive list, it is a pretty well-rounded one. Now, it's easy to look at this dichotomy and feel disheartened and exhausted. Survival or fulfillment? If I can't have both, what's the point? This is why many people bury their head in the sand when it comes to philosophy, because frankly, it can be depressing. But it can also be liberating. I push forward with the knowledge that I'm the product of a transitory period, with the knowledge that my toil can allow the sun to shine brighter on future generations, with the knowledge that I'm a temporary steward of this planet, and that's what keeps me going. Because the world can crumble, but as for me, my work ethic rests on two beliefs. The future can be better than the present, and I have the power to make it so. And as always, thanks for watching.